Welcome to Releasing Your Inner Dragon, where story creators talk story creation. Drake is an award-winning fantasy novelist and creative writing teacher. You can find his epic fantasy series, The Genesis Oblivion, on Kindle Vella. Marie runs a fantasy world-building channel called Just in Time Worlds, and her first book, The Hidden Blade, is available on Kindle Unlimited. We hope you enjoy this episode. Hello and welcome to another podcast from Releasing Your Inner Dragon. Today, we are going to talk about our approaches to world building and how we like to world build and what we world build. Now, this is obviously a topic that is very close to my heart. I have a whole YouTube channel dedicated to it, which you can check out at Just in Time Worlds.
The stuff that you do on that YouTube channel is really in-depth, and I like watching because, again, that's why we do this podcast together, because there's a lot of things we think alike on, but there's plenty that we think very differently on. And it's just the thinking differently. We both, almost everything we agree on. So we're not different in like opposite sides of things on most things. And we still have things we disagree on. But on most things we agree, okay, yes, this is what you want to accomplish. What I think is so brilliant, and the reason why I enjoy watching your YouTube channel, is you come at these at a completely different angle than I do. And we're both getting to the same spot, but it is so interesting to get that other perspective, because then it adds to my perspective. It doesn't take away, it doesn't conflict, it doesn't challenge. It literally just goes, oh, I'm definitely adding that little nugget of piece to mine too. And so I really do recommend that everybody go check that out. It is really, really well done.
Thank you so much. But before we get into it, do subscribe to this podcast by hitting the subscribe button or adding us to your favorites, maybe going to our websites and joining our mailing lists. And if you have writer friends who don't listen to us yet, share this with them. Sharing is caring, and it helps us a great deal.
Hugely.
Okay, so let's get into lore. Drake, where do you like to start with your world building?
So for me, I have a trifecta that I look at, because I feel like when I look at human society, whatever, I feel like there are three main aspects that literally shape everything. And so I break them down between society, government, and religion. And I kind of look at it in that order, even though I create all three of them in the same time, because first of all, every one of them actually creates the others. But the reason why I like to look at it this way is society is very limited. It can be an entire country, maybe Finland, and I don't know, but maybe Finland, all Finns kind of feel the same way about things. I live in America. We are massively huge and technically made up of 50 different individual countries just under an umbrella of American. And so, like, since I've grown up everywhere in the United States, weird things like down south, you eat something called a po' boy, and it's a long sandwich with meat and vegetables and mayonnaise or whatever on a whatever. When you go up to the East Coast, it's a sub sandwich, or in some areas of it, it's a grinder. And then, there's even one more, and I can't think of it off the top of my head, but there's four different names for the same stinking sandwich. And so society literally is limited. I mean, you can have two towns that are very, very, very different. And this actually happens a lot of times, where you'll have maybe a section of the town that's very, very crime riddled, and a section of the town that is multi-million-dollar homes. Those two areas in that same town probably don't have the same society. And so it becomes very localized. Government is bigger, but very limited, because government is limited based off of how far can I force people to do what I tell them to do? So you have this limited range of, you could say, like, you're a feudal king. You could say, I own all the way to the ocean. But if you only got 1,000 troops that can only go halfway to the ocean and enforce laws, then literally the rest of it is not yours. Like, they're not under your domain. They can do whatever the crap they want to do. And so it is less limited than social, or society, but still limited. And then religion, in my mind, is really not limited, because not only can it spread to every society and through every government, even governments that ban that religion, that will kill you. And we have those going on. That's something you don't have to look in the past. We have countries, I'm not going to name who they are, that will literally murder people who are believing things they don't want them to believe. They have outlawed religious things that they don't like. There are several, and it's not even just one culture. It's tons of different cultures that are still doing that today. So those are the three that I like to kind of think about as an overarching thing. Because I think that, a lot of government and a lot of laws are created by whatever the dominant religion is in there. A lot of society, I think society helps shape religion more than anything else, because everyone gets their own little rituals or their own little whatevers. And that's the reason why, like in Christianity, you have 20 different versions of Christianity. They're all, Christ followers, but they're very, I grew up Baptist, and we believe things that Lutherans do not believe. And so it's just interesting that we all came from the same thing. Like, I think the biggest shock that I ever learned, this is a while ago, but Judaism, but the thing that boggled my mind is, especially in Baptist, the number one thing that is slammed on young Baptist people growing up is hell. You will do what you're told, or you will burn in hell for all of eternity. You will suffer. And so I get to be an adult and hang out with, more Jewish people, and I find out they don't even have a hell. They don't believe in hell. And I'm like, well, how did our religion come from yours? And like, we have this thing that, like, it just blew my mind.
Hell is a Christian invention.
Yeah, because I knew, growing up Baptist, I know we come from, Judaism was our base. That's where we got things from. That's the genesis of us. And so it's brilliant. I mean, it's amazing. So, and now as a writer, that's the stuff that I try to think about. I try to think about the fact that weird things can happen, and society can really make religious differences between, even if it's the same religion, it can change from society to society. And then, most of the time government is dictated by the religion, because if, you look at the old Aztec communities, where the only way to appease your gods is human sacrifice. So like, murder really wasn't, I wouldn't think, a big deal, because human life wasn't a big deal.
I would say that murder probably was, because it is quite likely that the human sacrifice element was probably conducted on prisoners of war. So, you're killing your enemy. And but hold on. So I think some of it comes in there. And I think the other thing is, because it's the ritual that the god demands, it's not seen as murder, which is a lot like, people like to say, that the 10 commandments say, thou shalt not kill. Yes, except when your neighbor works on a Sunday, in which case stone him, or he wears mixed cloth, in which case stone him, or there's a lot of stoning offenses in the Bible. I'ma just say it. Mm-hmm. Murder is kind of it's only murder if we say it's murder.
Right. But, and probably that was the wrong word. What I really, and I said it second, the value of an individual human life was probably worthless to everyone in their opinion, because anybody could be used, and actually they did, obviously prisoners of war were used, but there was an entire industry of people who literally just went to even villages in your own territory and just took people. And if you could take them and bring them and sell them as sacrifices, you got money, you got paid. It didn't matter. It didn't matter where they came from. Nobody cared. Because again, I think that's a difference between like modern day Western culture, where we actually value human life. And when somebody dies, we all are negatively impacted by it. I don't think a Westerner can read or watch the stories that came out of the tragedy of Uvalde, Texas, with the children that were murdered, and not be just horrendously saddened and horrified by that event, and not even understand how a person could do such an atrocity. But I think that comes from, the Western view of religion. That's the reason why, I don't consider myself all that religious anymore. I still am in ways, because I still call myself agnostic, but I still believe, and again, this is my belief, but I still believe that we owe a huge debt of gratitude toward Christianity for creating Western society at the level that it is.
I don't actually think that Christianity had that much to do with that. I think that we changed Christianity to suit our evolving understanding of morality rather than the other way around, because Christianity in the Middle Ages was a pretty brutal thing.
To anyone not Christian, yes.
One of the most devastating wars fought in Europe was the wars of religion, the wars between Protestants and Catholics. It was horrifying. I mean, Europe,
and that came to Canada and America. You know, you couldn't.
Yes, because people fled. But you have to understand the level of destruction wrought in Europe during the 30 Years' War was. It was the most horrifying war. In some ways, it's comparable to like the Second World War or the First World War in like the level of its violence and its death count and so on. So I would say more that we changed, and we changed our religion with us. I'm leery of saying that Christianity was the thing that made us what we are.
But here's why I'll challenge you on that. So first of all, and unfortunately, it's what's happening in America right now. And I don't want to get political, and we're definitely not going to go down that path. But as a writer, understanding culture and society is a part of this. And so that's one of the things that I always say when I'm doing my world building class is I'm going to offend you during this class, because we're going to talk as gods creating an entire culture, races, and everything else. And to do that, we have to look at what we know, which is our world. And so I may say some things that offend some people. And if I do, I'm sorry, but I'm not talking about our real world. I'm talking about my understanding of it so that I can apply that to writing. Pretty much every major atrocity, including the 30-year war, one thing has to happen. One society has to be convinced that another group isn't human. The Germans were convinced that Jews were not human. They were less than human. So therefore, slaughtering 6 million of them, it doesn't matter. They're not human. And like I said, unfortunately, that's what's happening here in America with the left and the right. Each side is starting to, and I feel like one side more than the other, but definitely both sides are starting to see the other as not human. And so if they die, when you're on the extremes on both sides, then there's no, you're good. You are on the side of angels. They are evil. So even if I do something evil to them, it's in the name of good, so I'm good. They're evil, and yes, I do something horrible to them, but it doesn't matter. They're evil, I'm good, and I'm doing the evil for good, so obviously good is good. And that is horrifying. It's what caused the war between the Catholics and the Protestants, because both sides saw the other as not being human anymore.
That's my point, because there's nothing quite like religion as a tool to do that with. Well,
but I didn't get to my point.
Yeah.
I don't think that innately humans care about murdering other humans. I think because the biggest reason why the Western society, in my mind, doesn't want to murder is because of the influence of, if you murder, you will not go to the good place. You will not go to whatever heaven you believe in through Christianity. And Christianity had the biggest influence on this.
See, I don't agree with that, because I have seen, in the East, yes, life might be cheaper, but it's not that cheap. Murder is not a free-for-all. You know what I mean? You don't get to kill people. And man is a social animal. Man is a social animal. Mm-hmm. And you can't live in a society where you're killing your own people constantly. You're not going to be in a society.
The Aztecs, there's some Asian cultures that are that way, that they did just wantonly kill people that were exactly like them.
A lot of those were ritualized. And I mean, I'm not convinced.
If there's no consequences for murder, then why would a human ever worry about it?
But there would be consequences for murder. There would be consequences in this life, because people, if you murder somebody, you will get arrested and punished by the state or by your community, to be honest with you, because I would not want to live in a community with a murderer. I would ostracize them at the very least.
But I feel the reason why those laws were created was because of the religious influence on you will burn in hell, or you won't go to your good place, or whatever.
No, because they come from Judaism, which doesn't have a hell. So
it's still the same thing.
No, because it doesn't have a hell.
No, it doesn't have a hell, but it's still the same thing. You still do not get what you get on the afterlife unless you do.
We're getting very far off point, and I think we need to get back to it, because we have a fundamental difference of opinion on this one, and we've agreed to agree to disagree.
Right, but it's important in my philosophy of world building because I believe that religion did impact it. And so you can disagree all you want. It doesn't matter.
Whoa. I believe religion had an impact. I just don't think religion is blanketly the reason why we are what we are today. That's what I disagree with. I think religion had massive impact.
I think it's the basis.
That's where we disagree.
And I do. And so when I'm creating my worlds, that's how I kind of think. As I create the religion and I decide what these people believe and how they worship, that to me is going to be the basis. And obviously it's going to change through time, but it's going to be the basis, the root of where their laws start coming from, how they view each other from a societal standpoint, how they view life from a societal standpoint. And, again, you can disagree with me all you want, but I believe that is where I start. And that's why religion impacts government and impacts society. As society impacts religion, society impacts government. I don't think government impacts religion all that much, but it still does, just not as much as society impacts religion or religion impacts government and society. And again, that's the reason why it's important for me is to understand my way of thinking on how I world build.
So I absolutely build religions into my worlds because religion is a human endeavor. We have had religions since we looked at the stars and wondered what they are.
No matter how far archaeologists have gone back in human culture, they have found religion.
Absolutely. So my worlds would be very weird if they didn't have it. I do have religion, and religion obviously has massive impact on society. Don't get me wrong. I just don't think that it's religion that drives society becoming better. I think society becomes better according to their own judgment, because that's the thing, right? Morality is...
Yeah, I don't think you can say that. I think they're so intertwined. I think you're right. Society does impact religion, but society can't not be impacted by religion. So again, They're so intertwined that I don't think you can pick them apart.
Regardless. So it's a conversation way beyond this podcast that we won't convince each other either way. So I do believe in building religions. And obviously, I mean, one of my main characters in the Ducal Heir is a priestess of a major religion. I built the religion with a great deal of respect for the human religions that I build upon. I don't disrespect religion. I think I have some problems with the way that religion is implemented in the world as it currently stands, but I don't come from a place of disrespect when I build a religion.
No, and on that, me and you are very much in line. I know we've talked about this offline.
Yeah.
It's why I'm agnostic, because I don't think man-made religions do much good, or at least they do a lot of harm as well as whatever good they do. And I don't think anybody can deny that. And again, everything you just list off, everything from the 30-Year War to the Crusades to, the Aztecs sacrificing people to, Islam, maybe the Tibetans don't.
Even them, like they have their nasty bits, because humans unfortunately are humans. Yeah. And religion is a very easy way to justify doing terrible things. Those people don't believe the same way we do. Therefore, they're not human. Therefore.
Yep. That is the number one danger of religion, is that it's the way that you make them not human versus us. And unfortunately, like I said, going back to American politics here have become our religion. And so therefore, they are no longer human because they don't follow our religion.
Yeah. So coming back to religion, speaking of religion, one of the things that I like to do in my world building is I like to create a physical item that goes with the world building.
Like what?
When I was building the religion that Nayera is a part of, I included bracelets that all of the believers of this faith wear, and they call them Soa bracelets, which is basically just a word that means holy, but I didn't want to use the word holy because it has a lot of connotations. So I try to steer away from words that have got, connotations and replace them with in-world words so that I don't give my readers too much baggage when I'm using a word, because a word like holy has got so much baggage attached to it that I'm like, it's better to just give a neutral word that doesn't mean anything, that doesn't carry that in real world baggage into the book. And that's my opinion. There are other authors who happily use words like holy with no issues. So It's just me.
I was this years old when I just figured out something about me listening to you. I never thought about how much my Christian upbringing, because I'm not a Christian anymore in my mind, affected how I create religions. Because I also have, because you also have, well, it's government, but you have the sashes, you have the hats, which is magic, and so on and so forth. But I've created 2 major religions for the 2 major series that I've done. And both of them have, like, one has the Book of the 12 and the other has the Book of the Dragons. Literally, I never even thought about that before until right this moment, that both of them are centered upon an ancient religious text, because subconsciously, growing up, in the Bible Belt and in the Bible environment, the Bible is a very central religious artifact.
When you world build, when any of us world build, we draw on our own experience and on our knowledge. It's all you've got to draw on. Right?
I think the most important thing to come out of our argument, which is fine. I mean, again, we agree on a lot, we don't agree on some, and it's perfectly fine. But I think the biggest thing that kudos to you and you have to do, which is very important to this discussion, is you, whatever your personal beliefs are, you have to understand that these people believe it. Like, one of the things that I loved was the HBO show Rome. They were the first time. So in my mind, every other TV show, every other movie that ever went to the Rome, it was always this, oh yeah, and we believe in these billions of gods, and but the writers didn't believe it, the actors didn't believe it. It never came off as authentic. And yet in Rome, they did this beautiful job of having these, every home had its own little shrines and the rituals that they worked into it. And you bought into, oh, right, they believe in the Roman gods as much as any Christian believes in Jesus.
Exactly.
Literally, it is their belief structure. And so even though, in the real world, I mean, you can debate that stuff all we want, the kudos that you did, and the reason why it is so well written, is because you allowed the world and the characters to 100% believe in what they're doing. And I think that's where a lot of people make a mistake that are not religious, is they will then bring that mindset into their world, which you absolutely didn't do, even though you have that mindset. And so that's definitely props on how to think about this as its own living, breathing, real world that you're creating.
I will not lie, it took me a while to get the mindset right, because it's not a mindset that comes very naturally to me. I have not been religious for 20 years. But nonetheless, when you're doing a religious character, it is important to treat them with respect as well, and to not, maybe they are like a televangelist, and that's fine. Maybe you're writing a televangelist type character. But if it's not, don't have every religious character be like that. Some of my family are religious, some of my friends are religious, and I've got nothing against them. They are nice people. We disagree on how many gods there are. I say there are none, they say there's one. That's all we disagree on.
Yep.
But the same applies in your world. It's like you'll have people who believe in their religion and follow the religion who are perfectly, like, they are, they don't have to be a caricature, and please don't make them a caricature. It is disrespectful to a lot of things. If you characterize, if you make people caricatures based on cultures and so on, it's disrespectful. And honestly, like, I don't want to read that. So if I find that in your writing, I'm just going to put the book down. But regardless,
it's why it's the same thing as when somebody asks me, well, how do you write someone of a different race than you? How do you write someone of a different sex than you, a different sexual orientation than you? My answer is always the same. You don't write, because if you do, it becomes a caricature of it. You write a great character, and then you give them aspects of that culture, or of that mindset, or of that whatever.
I want to get back to the sewer charm thing, because the sewer charm. So what the sewer charms allowed me to do, the sewer charms are things that believers wear. They're little physical items that believers wear, and they're made out of glass with like metal wrapping. Okay. But what they allowed me to do is, one, they allowed me to refer to the sewer charms in terms of the sewer charms clinked together. So they give me a sound element. They give me something that the light can refract through. So it's ways that I can talk about it. But it also gives me a constant reminder to the reader that these are religious people. So the way that a Christian would, hold on to their cross to take comfort from it.
Or the rosary for the Catholics.
Yeah. In the same way they take comfort from these charms. And
you treated them as if they believe 100% that it is real. So I want to give a little bit of behind the scenes. I don't know if I've ever even admitted this before, other than just to a few like really close people to me. One of the reasons why I was so desperate to rewrite the first book of the Genesis saga is the biggest mistake that I made. When I wrote the first book, I decided, and it was me picking on Christianity, I'm 100% honest, I decided that the 12 gods of man weren't real, and that the higher-ups of the church 100% knew that they were scam artists, that the entire religion was there to make money, and it had been forever, and I decided to run it that way. One, I wasn't a good enough writer to pull it off for anyone to notice, thank goodness, because by the time I started plotting out book 2, I realized that I needed the gods to be real to actually do the plot that I wanted to do. So in book 2, I just kind of ignored that the religion was fake in the first book. And again, I wasn't a strong enough writer to have pulled it off. And so no one even notices that you go from book 1, where religion is actually fake, to book 2, where religion is actually real. If I had been the writer that I am today, that would have been a really awkward shift, because I would have been able to really convey to the readers that religion is fake. And luckily I wasn't able to do it. But again, that is such just such a difference between the thinking. It's one of the reasons why I wanted to go back with these characters now really knowing that the gods are real. It does change some of the ways that they see the world and kind of interact with the world. And so therefore that's one of the big changes and it's very subtle through the rewrite of book 1, but it's why I was so hell-bent on it, because the very foundation of the 5-book arc was built off of book 1, where religion isn't real, and books 2 through 5, where religion is 100% real. And that's a bad way to write. Even though nobody noticed it, it still bothered me tremendously. So that brings up an interesting segue, I think, into what I like to call as world building by coloring in. Mm-hmm. So when I built my world for the Hidden Blade, I didn't build everything about the second continent, about Kisangi. I knew that Kisangi was there. I knew that the religion existed there, but I hadn't built any of the details around the religion, because I didn't need it yet. Book 1 is entirely focused inside Lumiaron, and Lumiaron doesn't believe in the gods. They have a completely different religion structured around the concept of the wheel, for a reason that becomes evident in plot. When I then wrote the second book,
I then went and colored in the lines of the religion and shaded the religion and built in the complexities. Because if I stopped in Hidden Blade to build the religion of Kisangi, like I wouldn't have finished Hidden Blade. You know what I mean? So build by all means, have the concepts and the broad kind of spectrums, but you don't need to color in the lines until you actually reach the point. As long as, and this is where it ties back to your not real not real religion, is as long as what you show the reader isn't so much that when you go and color in the lines, you suddenly like jerking all over what they thought they knew with no explanation. You jar the readers out of the world.
Right. And that's where I got lucky, because you don't really get that in the first book. I want to build upon that because, one of the things I think people like my classes is because I'm never just a do it this way, which is what you just did. And that's fine. I also want to explain why it's so important. And I think the reason why, because one of the biggest pitfalls of world building is for plotters. And you're not a plotter. You're more of a pantser. And we've discussed this before. And so I don't think pantsers fall into this trap very often because they don't want to figure everything out. So you innately, because you're more of a pantser, more of a discovery writer, you innately go, okay, well, I'm just going to do some broad strokes. And then when I get there, that's when I'll add the detail to it. Plotters like to know everything before they start writing. And for plotters, this is a huge pitfall. It's the reason why I will go to the same writers conference for 10 years and see the same people and have them say, yeah, I'm writing this big fantasy series, but I'm still world building. I'm like, it's been 10 years. You're not writing a fantasy series. You are literally just writing a role-playing campaign setting. That's what you're writing. It's not a novel. And, and again, I'm a D&D player, campaign writer, all that other stuff. But one of the things that I luckily learned really before, I had written novels because I wrote my first novel when I was 12, and it's literally based off of D&D and blah, 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 blah. But as I grew through that, time and started learning what stories really were and what, the huge difference between novels and, a campaign for a role-playing game is you don't want to waste time doing stuff that may never get used. And I'm not saying don't do it ever. You mentioned something where you had this thing where you had an entire culture and you developed like where this came from and all their rituals, and yet it's never in the stories. And that happens to me all the time too. I create stuff that never gets used. But I do, because I know I'm a heavy plotter, I do make sure that I limit myself on how deep I go. And when I'm teaching my world building class, it's one of my sections that I call, you need to go deep, not wide. And so what I mean by that is in the initial stages, when you're going wide, you're trying to figure out what the world is like. You're not very deep. It's just this thin layer of, okay, this is what this government's gonna be like, and this government, and this is what this religion's gonna be like, and this religion's gonna be like. And then as you write the story, you may never get to this religion or this government over here. It was mentioned, maybe someone mentions, over there, those guys, they do this, but that's literally the only impact it has on your story. It just kind of says, oh, wait, there's another kingdom over there. And that's all that we need for this story. But then you get into this religion or this culture or this government, then you go deep because you're there. It has impact on the story. So obviously my POV characters, I want to know everything I can about their religion, everything I can about their government, everything I can about their society, even if the story is not. And this is one thing that we differed, where my plotting forces me to go down this path and you're a discovery writer, so you don't. Because one of the differences when we were talking about this ahead of time is you don't even do that for your main characters. You don't go as deep maybe as whatever. But for me, I really want to understand where this character grew up, because it's going to impact the way I run that character, the way I think about for that character, because that's, I've said this before, I'm a method writer. I do become my character to write my character. I'm not me. I'm me when I'm editing, but I am absolutely that guy, that girl, that lion, that whatever I'm writing, that orc, I am them. And so for me to really become them, and you learn this in method acting school, to really become them, you have to really understand a lot about that person. And so for my POV characters, I will go deep. I'll go deep on their religion and their culture and their society and where they came from. And it allows me to do crazy things that I don't know if I would have done if I was just discovery writing. Like, as an example, and I know I keep going back to the Genesis saga, but it's just a great thing that I know a lot about. When you meet Arderi, the farm boy, the farm that he's on feels very communist prison. It isn't a communist prison, but it really feels that way. And in a later chapter, he makes the comment of something like, oh, people from this town still view us as if we're slaves, but slavery ended like 50 years ago or 100 years ago. So then you go, oh, crap, he still lives in the place that's why it has that feel still. Even though it's several generations removed, they are still doing the same job they did when they were slaves. They're still living in the same apartment complexes that they did when they were slaves. They're still basically run by the same people that, you know, just now they make a little bit of money and they have a feeling of freedom of, you know, that they can dictate their own lives, but the reason why is because there's not a lot of opportunities, especially in a medieval world. If you were born a farmer, you're more than likely going to be a farmer, and you're more than likely going to die a farmer. So whether you were born a slave farmer or a free farmer, it's really not that, in my mind, and that's the way I played it, there's really not that much difference. But there is to that character's mindset, because he knows that he's a descendant of slaves. That still impacts him. And he's very much, no, we're not. We are absolutely sure. I'm living in the same house my great-great-grandfather did when he was a slave. I'm doing the same job my great-great-grandfather did when he was a slave. I haven't moved. Like, nothing in my life is really that much different than his, but I'm not him. And so that is something I wanted to play with. And if I hadn't have gone down that path to really understand where their society came from and like what that mindset trickled down through, I don't think I would have come up with that just kind of on the fly. And so that's why I like to go deep and plot before I start writing.
So I do, for all that I'm a pantser, I do a lot of world building.
You do a lot of plotting on world building.
Yeah.
We've discussed that.
And I do have a very comprehensive understanding of the things that impact my characters. But for example, Louis isn't very religious as a main character, which is very funny, but for a plot reason that'll eventually come out. But because of that, the world building that I did on the religion of the Empire of Lumiaron basically is an iceberg. There's a lot of it, but it doesn't show in the story because he doesn't really, he's not a religious guy. He's just not. It's not that he's, you know, an unbeliever, or he just doesn't care. While I do that kind of world building to understand the character, like I know how the nobility works because he is part of the noble class. And I understand how their religion works because it's central to the plot. But some things don't show in the story because the character doesn't care about it.
Right. Well, and that's bringing in realism. So like in the realm, one of the races is a religious zealot militant environment, and they are very, 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 the entire race is very zealot. They 100% buy into everything that they do. And so they're almost in lockstep with each other. There's very little variation. And I like that. That's fun to play with. Switch to Genesis Saga. One of the interesting things, and this even happened in the first book, it's just that it was opposite. So there are characters who don't believe at all, and then characters who very much believe, and it allows me to do stuff. And this was in the original version where one of the characters has this little religious totem that they use, and he literally is honestly believing it and worshiping it and so on and so forth. And then another character, his wife is very religious, and before he leaves on this adventure thing, she gives him one of these for protection, and he's like, he takes it because it's his wife giving. He's not going to like start an argument here, but he's like, in his mind, he thinks, yeah, right. If this thing could actually do that, I would wear 10 of them. Like he's completely, now the original way I wrote it, he was right and they were wrong. And in the rewrite, they're right and he's wrong. But that's the only, and it still plays out the same way. And that's what gives you, unless you have a very mono zealot culture that doesn't have a deviation, that they kill deviation, you're going to have variations. If you have any type of freedom of thought at all, you're going to have people that truly 100%, zealotly believe. You're going to have others that just believe, but they just are comfortable with it. Some that are like, maybe not. And others that are like, no, it's all dumb. This is stupid. And that brings realism into your world building that just wouldn't exist.
And
otherwise.
even when your gods are real, as long as your gods aren't, running down to the earth every day and doing things directly, people can still disbelieve. And honestly, if your gods are running down and doing things every day, then you probably need to rethink the story you're telling, because that's a little bit too much.
It depends. It depends on what you're doing.
No, but you can have the gods intervene. But
well, I was gonna say this. Yeah. In Fiend Folly, now I know it's a comedy, but that world, even though it's a fantasy world, every single thing in pop culture in our world exists in that world. So they actually talk about seeing the Avengers movie. Now there's no movie theaters, there's no electricity, so I never explained how they see the Avengers movie. But not only is the Avengers movie, because there's a quest that they actually have to get a Comic-Con exclusive Captain America or Thor, not Captain America, Thor. So they have to get a Thor Comic-Con exclusive statue that's a holy relic of this one, troop, and they have to, or this one cult, and they have to go get that and rescue it out of there. And it absolutely came from Comic-Con in the story, even though I don't explain how does Comic-Con exist in this world, and you never see it. You never see a TV, you never see any modern day anything like that. But there is a discussion in my other cartoon, Guards, which will be released. I'm just behind on it because of the fact of cancer. But there's a discussion between the two where one of the guys is like, oh, I just don't believe in religion, and the other guy's like, how can you not believe in religion? I literally passed Thor on my way to work today. He was in the bar. I could sit down and have a talk with him. How do you not believe? So, and what I'm playing with there is, because atheism is a religion in that world, which is hilarious to me, because you can sit down and have a beer with the gods. They're there. You don't need any faith to believe in the gods of this world, because they literally just hang out with you. And yet there's a major religion that's getting a lot of traction, which is the atheist religion. And I run them exactly like Catholicism, just from an atheistic standpoint. So
I do want to get back to world building, because there's one other thing that I want to discuss, which is when you're building your cultures, your society, as you call it, the physical environment matters.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to juxtapose two of my cultures. On the one hand, there is the culture of the desert, okay? The culture of the Siran Mashara. Now, this is a massive, massive desert on the western side of the Kisangi continent. And these people are nomads. They travel through the desert because you can't stay in one place for very long. They go to the sea to harvest the bounty of the ocean every year, and the rest of the time they travel and so on. And to them, water is obviously a critical important things, like knowing where the oasis is, knowing how to dig to an ephemeral river, knowing where the groundwater, where the groundwater is accessible, where the water is salty, all of those kinds of things. So the culture is built around the concept of desert life.
Mm-hmm.
And they have the rhythms of desert life, so that they'll, during the hottest part of the day, they rest and that kind of thing, mm-hmm. Right? And that is the culture that gave that continent the concept of 2 men marry 1 woman, of threesome marriages. And the reason why they did that was because of their very harsh environment. Because in that kind of environment, you needed the labor of 2 men to support the children of 1 woman, because otherwise you just didn't survive in the desert. And so that's why they developed that marriage structure. By contrast, in the archipelago, the island archipelago, which is kind of more Caribbean style natural life. So it's got, clear waters, and they sail between islands, and the islands have got tropical fruits on it and all the rest of that. They have a very different culture, because their culture is all about boat life and sea life, right? So they have these boats called karkarongs, and a boy has to build one when he turns, 13, or a girl for that matter, because they don't really draw those distinctions between sexes very much. And they have to sail the karkarong from one island to the next, and that proves their adulthood. And they fish from poles, and so their sayings, their culture, their environment, it's shaped by their environment. And I think that's very important when you're world building, is what is the physical environment, especially if it's something as distinctive as a desert or a tropical island. It's not just Central Europe or Central Asia,
but even a Central Europe is going to impact how,
yes,
now you have different types of resources, and, different things become valuable. So, the way you did the desert culture, much the same as like Robert Jordan did the Aiel in Wheel of Time. Everything was about water. Their rituals were about water and shade. Like they would say something like, may you find shade was their farewell, because that shade is vitally important to a desert nomad. And so you do want to think about this stuff. You want to think about the environment and how much it impacts everything, and it really comes down to resources. What we're really talking about with environment is resources. If you have a resource rich environment with certain things, then that's going to make a completely different society than a resource poor area, which is going to make things have different values and things have different meanings and so on and so forth. And so, yes, you absolutely need to think about the environment that these people are coming from. A lot of people just do the entire fantasy world is just, middle Europe for the entire thing. And so they don't play with that a lot. But I do like playing with the differences of those. And I think it's very important. There's one last thing that I do want to talk about, but go ahead and continue going.
I actually wanted to say, I think there is one last thing we should talk about that you brought up, which is languages and words.
Okay. So there's two more things we're going to talk about.
Yeah, because you do the same thing that I do, which is you pick a real world language, and then when you need to make up fantasy words, you choose words from that language and bring it in. So I
usually edit it a little bit.
Yeah, edit a little bit, jam it together. Some words I don't. Some words I'm just like, no, that word's great. I'll just use it as is.
Right.
But I find it valuable to use multiple languages. So, for example, for Kisangi, I really leaned into the African languages, so Hereru and Somalian and the Nigerian languages and so on, because I wanted that kind of feel and flavor to the words that they use there. For the Empire, for Lumiaron, I leaned heavily on French and German, because that's the feeling and flavor of the words I wanted there, except where I used Swedish and Finnish, because those words are kind of universal. So,
and see, that's an advantage you absolutely have over me. As I love to say in my joke, if you can speak 3 languages, you're trilingual. If you can speak 2 languages, you're bilingual. If you can speak 1 language, you're American. So I think a lot of Americans just don't think about language, because we're so, we speak English, and we speak our version of English, and it's very narcissistic as far as that's concerned. So, especially American writers should absolutely, because you speak, how many languages do you speak?
4.
Yeah, that's insane. I barely speak 1. So I think it is very important to think about that. And that's kind of the reason why I started doing it, decades ago, where I would go, okay, so this culture in this world, I'm going to base off of whatever language, Japanese or an African language or a Nordic language or whatever. And what I mean by that is, and again, this kind of goes back to one of our earlier podcasts where we're talking about consistency and balance of everything. The nice thing about this is even if I'm not using the exact word, if I'm changing a couple of syllables or whatever, it still sounds, since it's based off of words that all come from one language, then that means that all of my made up fantasy words from that area, from that culture, kind of sound like they came from the same base language, which is what I'm trying for. And so I think that's vital to think about in world building, and especially for us Americans who don't think about the differences in language. You really, really do need to spend some time and think. Now, I'll never do what Tolkien did. I'll never make up an entire fake language, because no one, yes, there's few. I never read that. I'm not going to read a paragraph of Elvish and then read the exact same paragraph translated in English. I'm going to skip that and just go right to English because I don't speak Elvish. So I'm never going to do that. But I do like to drop in those words, those occasional, oh, we call this that, and oh, we call this that, because they're unique. The things that I name with those are always things that are unique to that world. So like the Chiutlan in Genesis is a very specific thing that only exists in that world. So I'd have to name it something anyway. So, it's not an apple.
So I do want to say, while I fully agree with don't rename common things, I did, just today, I actually renamed a plant that in our world is called a welwitschia. Now, the reason why I renamed the welwitschia is because I was doing research for my YouTube channel on desert plants, and I came across a snippet that said the welwitschia was named after the Austrian explorer who classified it in 1860, whatever. And I was like, oh, crap.
That dude didn't live in your world.
Can't call it a welwitschia, because anybody who, Googles the name and finds that piece of information is going to be like, but why was it called a welwitschia in your world then?
But it was the same thing. Me and you do the same thing with time. Yes. You don't have clocks, so you figure out a different way to talk about time. I don't have clocks, and so I figure out a different way to talk about time. And they never say I waited a second, because seconds don't exist because there's no clock. Yeah. So never do I use that term in almost anything that I write. There's been some things that have clocks, but in the two big series that I keep talking about all the time, Genesis and the Realm, there's no clock. So there's no second. That word is never used. I actually have, in almost everything that I write, I probably have 300 or 400 words that are banned, and they're not allowed to be written in the text. And I do have a macro that just has banned words that will go through and highlight any of them that, that I accidentally, because, he waited a second. It's just a normal way to say it, but I don't want to say that. I want to say he waited a moment or whatever. He paused, whatever I have to do to get away from the word second. And so it's the same thing.
Yes, it absolutely is. Now, there are authors who say that you don't have to do that, and I respect them. I even read some of them. It's not how I like to world build. Mm-hmm. I personally, when I come across a thing that I know for a fact is named after something that comes from our world, I like to change the name. At the very least, I'll try and find a word in the base language. So what I did for welwitschia was I looked up what the Hereru people call it, because they wouldn't have called it a welwitschia. They've been living with a plant for, hundreds of thousands of years. So they called it an onyanga, which I thought was such a beautiful word, onyanga. So I was like, I'm going to use that.
Of course, when you do research on that, you find out there was a boy named Onyanga who actually was the first to eat the plant. And so that's
absolutely kidding. But no one's going to find that piece of information.
Well, that's because I just made it up, but yeah, that's beside the point.
So that to me is like the only time when I would advocate renaming things that we have in our world. That and time. Well, what I do with time is I actually like to build time expressions. So because I have my in the Empire of Lumiaron, they use the candle as a clock. So what I like to do there is to say, build everything around the candle. So they will say things like, before the wax had even cooled, he did blah, 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 to indicate that he was, in a hurry. Mm-hmm. And in the water, in Kisangi, they use the water clock. So their expressions of time is around, before the water had time to run from the spigot, he mm-hmm. did blah, 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 and stuff like that.
Because every human throughout time has always measured time. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's just by the sun and the moon, maybe it's whatever, but it's not real, especially considering most fantasy is going to be modern civilizations. they really are. They're way better off than what, humans were in the medieval times. So they're going to have something that they're dealing with time. And so I think it's not realistic to not have it. And, I've used all those things. I've used time. I've used, how you measure time with your hand or whatever. That's what one culture does. So it's just, you have to kind of think about that when you're doing this and make it realistic and consistent throughout your world.
What's the other thing you wanted to talk about besides naming things?
I think it's really important when you're world building. And again, this is maybe more of a plotter thing than a pantser thing, but I like to create not just the history of things. I create 3 histories of every single thing in all the worlds that I create, because I'm a firm believer that there are 3 histories in everything. There's the history of the people who won or who wrote it. There's the history of the people who lost or it was taken from them. And then there's the actual history that no one really even knows. That's just for me. And so I do like to create 3 different versions of history on everything and how things evolve to where they're at. And the reason is because the reason why I love being a plotter is anytime I spend time just thinking about stuff, I'm not writing anything. I'm not story creating or anything. I'm just thinking about religions or worlds or cultures or language or whatever. I get amazing story ideas without even thinking about stories. So I've really got into the habit of doing these 3 types of history because it allows, not only does it allow for a lot of diversity within the world, where one, just like we talk about religion, where one guy's like, what do you mean you don't believe in gods? They're 100% real. And they're like, what do you mean you believe in gods? It's totally fake. There's no proof of it whatsoever. It's the same thing with history. So like going back to that little thing that I said about our dairy basically sloughing off the fact that we're not slaves. The reason why he said is because when he gets out of his environment, he's actually to the part of the world that used those as slaves, and their food still comes from those farms. Those people really don't see them as free. Sure, I mean, because they don't know anything about it. They don't care that those people are getting now paid a pittance for doing the work that they used to do under, threat of death. To them, and they're called steads. They're not even called farms. They're called steads. To them, a person from a stead is literally just a slave. And so they're going to see them as that. They're not going to see them as somebody, I'm from the big city. I've got education and freedom. And even though they're just as much of a slave, just like everyone in the world is actually a slave to having to get your basic survival things, there's really no difference. But I like playing with the mentality difference between the two. And so it's the same thing with history. I do like coming up with, oh, you believe this because you won the war, but we know that you're wrong. And the truth is this, but the reality is that both of them are wrong.
On that point, it's the only time when I have deliberately chosen to use, as you know, Bob dialogue. Because I had one scene where a guy who came from the losing side he basically used, as you know, Bob dialogue to force the other character to admit that them on the winning side committed atrocities on the losing side. So yes, it was, as you know, Bob dialogue, but it's deliberately done by the character.
Right. He's poking the bear.
Exactly.
And that is a great way to use, as you know, dialogue, because we both know this, but I'm going to throw it in your face because you're a jerk and I'm not. So yeah, that's a brilliant way to use the, as you know, dialogue.
So even as you know, Bob dialogue has its place.
So like I said, I center around the 3 things: society, religion, and government. And then I create how they got there. And I usually work backwards because I start with the modern, because there are things that I need. It's the same thing as when I'm teaching how to create point of view characters. Don't create a cool character and then try to write a story around them. To me, that's not going to work as good as, okay, here's the story I need to tell, which means that the character needs to be these things so that I can tell this story. I do the same thing with world building. I kind of have an idea of the story that I'm telling. So I go, okay, well, then I need the world to have had one, like in the Genesis, I need that world to, 200 or 300 years, 150, 200 years ago to have had slaves. I need that for, thematic elements that I'm going to be playing with. Matter of fact, they still have slavery, just not of the same type. So because of that is why the steads were created in my mind and why they got described as very, communism, almost prison-like environments. Matter of fact, the White City, which is this one race called the Almorantians, when one of the main characters gets there, it's this very famous, beautiful city with these massive walls. And it's obviously all there to protect these little fragile creatures that live inside. Later, you find out that it wasn't built for that reason, that it actually had a completely different reason of why it was. And it wasn't to keep things out. If I didn't go into that past and figure all this stuff out, I wouldn't have been able to think about it this way and have this truth be this truth, only to be proven a lie when you gain more information. And so history, I think, is very, very important for especially epic fantasy, adventure fantasy, stuff like that, because you really need to expand upon not just what the world is now, but why is it the way it is? Because those things can give you amazing story conflicts and amazing story ideas.
You can have your world be anything you like. You can have absolutely anything in it. You just have to go back and say, why? Mm-hmm. It doesn't have to make sense within our world. It has to make sense internally. Why is it like this? And if you know the answer to that, it'll inform everything else and you'll be fine. And I think that's a great note on which to end this podcast.
Absolutely. Bye.
Hey guys, Drake here. Thank you so much for listening to Releasing Your Inner Dragon podcast. I hope you're getting a ton of information and maybe even some nuggets of gold that you can take into your own writing to help you on your journey of story creation. A couple things I want to throw at you. First of all, for the first time in years, I am opening myself up to being a private mentor again. If you would like for me to work with you to improve your writing right now, reach out to me. You can either go to my website, maxwellalexanderdrake.com, and send me a contact form, or just email me at author@maxadrake.com. Also, as many of you may know, I've been out of the novel game for quite a few years. I was the lead fiction writer for EverQuest Next from Sony. I've been in the movie and TV industry for a few years now, but I am excited to say I'm back into the novel game. I've actually been working on a novel for a little while now, and I'm going to start dropping it on Amazon's Vella. So if you're on that platform, look me up, Maxwell Alexander Drake. Thank you again for listening, and as always, keep writing.
Hi guys, this is Marie from Releasing Your Inner Dragon, and I hope you're enjoying the podcast. If you're interested in more content on fantasy world building, head over to YouTube and look up Just in Time Worlds. I release tons of content there. If you'd like to check out my book, The Hidden Blade by Marie M. Mullaney, it is available as an ebook, audiobook, and print book on Amazon. Thanks for listening and see you soon.